Hello and welcome to CrossTalk. I'm Peter Lavelle. Does Pakistan face the prospect of becoming a failed state? The U.S. claims it is an indispensable ally in its so-called war on terror. Opinions on the ground see the U.S. as part of Pakistan's security problems. Are Washington and Islamabad really on the same page? To discuss Pakistan-U.S. relations, I'm joined by Dan Qayyum in Dubai. He's the editor of the news service PakistanKakudaHavis.com. In Washington, we have Shuja Nawaz. He's the director of the South Asia Center at the Atlantic Council of the United States and author of Cross Pakistan, Its Army and Wars Within. And in London, we go to Anatol Lieven, the chair of International Relations and Terrorism Studies at King's College London, and the author of the upcoming book, Pakistan, A Hard Country, and another member of our Crosstalk team, Yelena Hanga. All right, crosstalk rules in effect, gentlemen. That means you can jump in anytime you want. Anatol, I want to go to you first. Hillary Clinton was in Islamabad not long ago. I had a gift, $500 million for civilian projects, build dams and schools and whatnot. The Pakistanis didn't seem all that grateful, especially after almost $12 billion in aid since the Bush administration. Almost $8 billion of that was for military. But they weren't grateful. So I asked maybe not even a rhetorical question. What is the state of U.S.-Pakistani relations?
Well, this is like a very unhappy, but ultimately inevitable marriage, or at least if this marriage breaks, the damage to both parties will be catastrophic. The thing is that on some issues, Pakistan and America do have very much the same interests. On others, the Pakistanis, virtually the whole population, regard their interests as very different indeed from the Americans. But in the wider context of what I suppose we're still doomed to call the war on terror, America simply cannot get on without Pakistan. This is a matter of scale. I mean, Pakistan is 6 times the size of Afghanistan or Iraq. It has one of the biggest and most effective armies in the world. It has nuclear weapons. It has a huge diaspora in Britain and therefore in Europe. And when it comes to controlling terrorism against the West, I stress against the West, in the West, not in Afghanistan, Pakistan has in fact been an indispensable and very useful ally in tackling Al-Qaeda. So America simply can't do without them, even though when it comes to Afghanistan and the Afghan Taliban, Pakistan continues to follow what is in effect a very different agenda.
Dan, I'd like to go to you in Dubai. That's a very good point, a different agenda. I mean, of course, the United States and Pakistan have mutual interests on a number of things, but not on everything. I mean, a lot of people within even the political establishment in Pakistan are saying that the United States, with its policies, is infringing upon the sovereignty of Pakistan, and it's extremely unpopular. And there are charges that Pakistan will just go so far in dealing with the Taliban within its own territory and its access to Afghanistan. So not a perfect relationship, but far from perfect.
I think Anatol is correct there, but what the problem that Pakistan and the U.S. have between them is the perception of what Pakistan sees Afghanistan becoming once the U.S. does leave. Now, Pakistan does not obviously feel comfortable with the Karzai administration in charge. What they're looking forward to is having a Pakistan-friendly government in charge, which obviously denies India the space that it currently enjoys under Karzai in India, which Pakistan sees as a destabilizing factor as far as the Pakistan security situation is concerned.
Okay.
So I think that's where the difference lies. Pakistan, sorry.
Go ahead. Go. I was going to go to Washington. Shuja, it's interesting here what we heard Dan just say, and I think maybe that this is where the biggest problem is that Pakistan wants to have an Afghanistan that is friendly to Islamabad, but can that include Mr. Karzai, because that's the U.S. man in Afghanistan? I mean, is that really where we have the differerences? Can we find mutual accommodation between the two? Because we've heard just recently, over the last week or so, a Pakistan-Afghanistan strategic relationship. But where does that leave Mr. Karzai and his agenda for Afghanistan and the American one?
I think, first of all, to go back to Anatol's point, this is a misalliance between the U.S. and Pakistan. Countries really don't have friendships. They have relationships and they have interests, and the relationships are based on interests. So we shouldn't really see this as a permanent relationship. There will always be differences, and the baggage of history of the U.S.-Pakistan roller coaster relationship really impinges on current decisions and perceptions inside Pakistan. As far as Afghanistan is concerned, in my view, Pakistan could certainly live with Karzai, provided it sees a stable Afghan entity in which the Pakhtuns have a much greater say. That's the kind of government that they could live with, because it's the Pakhtuns that are most contiguous to the area that's Pakistan on the border. And if the Pakhtuns are unhappy that the Northern Alliance or other groups that are traditionally closer to India have greater say, then Pakistan will be unhappy. Some of the recent signals from Kabul have been quite positive. I personally see this developing because Karzai obviously is playing the Pakistan card with both India and the United States. And let's see how it develops in the next few months.
All right, gentlemen, we're all talking about what kind of relationship in the future the United States and Pakistan will have. Let's listen to Secretary of State Clinton when she was in Islamabad, and she talked about history too, and it wasn't a good history. Let's listen to what she had to say.
Our partnership with Pakistan goes far beyond security. It is economic, political, educational, cultural, historical, rooted in family ties. That this misperception has persisted for so long tells us we have not done a good enough job of connecting our partnership with concrete improvements in the lives of Pakistanis. And with this dialogue, we are working very hard to change that perception and to deliver results that truly have the concrete effects we are seeking.
Okay, well, I'd like to look at some numbers right here. Let's look at what Secretary Clinton wants to change. A recent Gallup poll had 59% of Pakistanis believe the United States was Pakistan's greatest threat. Last August, the Pew Research Center study found that 64% of Pakistanis consider the U.S. as an enemy, though 9% thought Washington was its partner. Anatol, how do you get over that? I mean, we've been looking at the different elite relationships between intelligence agencies, politicians, and and Hillary Clinton can put on a very big smile. She has to, because of that, maybe an inconvenient marriage, as you're putting it. But let's go a lot deeper, and I think that counts a lot more. Do you think that they really can make a difference in the perception? Because Pakistan, let's face it, is an anti-American country when it comes beyond the political elite.
Well, you're right, and I think it will be very, very difficult to shift those basic perceptions. But I think a couple of points need to be made. The first is that being emotionally hostile to America doesn't mean supporting either an Islamist revolution inside Pakistan, which would destroy the country, or supporting Pakistani state actions against America, which would bring down an American reprisal, which would also destroy the country. So that, in the end, most Pakistanis have, whatever their feelings about America, an ultimately fairly sensible attitude towards their own interests and the threats to those interests. The second thing is that the US could do a lot more. Clinton is promising to do a lot more, but we have to see what will happen. In terms of making clearer, at least to more ordinary Pakistanis, that American aid does something to help them. Because over the years, the problem is that the money coming in from America has vanished into the state system. Much of it has gone to the armed forces. Ordinary people have seen no results at all. A few really major successful infrastructure projects, for example, would, show the population that they've gained something from America and they will lose something if there is a breach with America. But I have to say that this will only affect opinion, shall we say, pretty much at the margins. anti-American feeling is very deep-rooted by now.
Dan, if I can go to you in Dubai, I mean, isn't that really one of the other big problems here, is that the political and military security elites in Pakistan have this amazing balance where they have to look at their foreign policy and then they have to look at the population. And then a lot of things are going wrong in Pakistan right now. Their unemployment rate, infrastructure issues, maybe that's what the $500 million is for. We'll see how it's spent. But I mean, Pakistan is not in a very healthy state right now, and the political elite has to look abroad and it has to look at its local population at the same time and make some very hard choices.
I think the problem we have is that we've got a completely incompetent and corrupt government in charge, which frankly doesn't really, isn't really capable or has the will to solve these crises which Pakistanis face today, which includes the electricity crisis that they have, the power shortages, we've got the water crisis these days, we've got sugar, you name it, and there is a crisis about it in Pakistan. And the government seems to be embroiled in non-issues, infighting between the opposition and the government itself and different factions. So that's where, it doesn't really affect Pakistanis, whatever aid that the U.S. comes up with. In fact, when you look at the Kerry-Lugar bill, the conditions it came up with, they were, the nation itself took it as humiliation, basically, because the kind of conditions and the language that were used in that bill didn't really have it actually was counter-effective in getting the sort of favorable opinion within the Pakistanis that the U.S. is after. And the aid itself will not change anything unless it actually transforms into, a way of solving these problems that the people face on a day-to-day basis. As it stands, all of the money disappears, as Anton correctly said, disappears into the state system and the corrupt machinery, and doesn't really trickle down to the masses. So that's where the problem is, I believe.
All right, gentlemen, I'm going to jump in here after a short break. We'll continue our discussion on Pakistan. Stay with RT. Welcome back to CrossTalk. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're talking about the U.S.-Pakistan relationship and its role in the so-called war on terrorism. But before, let's see what Russians think about the situation in the region.
The U.S. war on terror has reached into Pakistan since the invasion of Afghanistan in 2001. And today, Pakistan, as officials say, is fundamental to any NATO and U.S. success in Afghanistan. However, there is considerable skepticism regarding the effectiveness of the U.S. and NATO presence across the region. According to a World Public Opinion poll, 63% of Russians believe that most Afghans want NATO forces to leave the country, and only 8% think the locals want NATO forces to remain. Peter?
Okay, Shuja, if I can go back to you in Washington, I mean, the U.S. hopes in one way, one fashion or another, that the Pakistanis, what they're supposed to do in the deal is to bring the Taliban to the negotiating table in one form or another, hopefully not have to deal with them directly, they're the intermediary. But in a broader picture, and I think I want to address this to everyone here, and this is my own opinion, all across the region, everyone's just watching, really, waiting for some kind of strategic withdrawal, defeat of the United States, be it in Iraq, if the state were to not be as solid as the Americans had hoped when they're starting to leave. They're already talking about leaving Afghanistan. I mean, the United States is talking about the future, and for Americans, the future comes real soon. In the region, it's a lot more long-term. So how can we be talking about a negotiated peace when at the same time the Obama administration, under enormous pressure, is being pressured to actually leave the region or leave it not on the same level of where troops are and security forces are, just to lower it and move back? How can you do both at the same time?
Well, I think you have to be careful not to repeat the mistakes of the past, and that is to have a very precipitate withdrawal, which is what has informed a lot of the caginess and the caution on the part of the Pakistanis that as happened after the Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan, that the Americans, after having helped Pakistan with the Mujahideen and installed a government in Kabul, basically took off in the middle of the night. That is unlikely to happen this time. I think another thing that one needs to be careful about is that Pakistan may or may not have some kind of a relationship with the Taliban, but Pakistan has never historically been able to control the Taliban, either when they were in power initially or when they're out of power and seeking refuge in distant parts of the border region. The third thing is that the majority of people inside Pakistan do not favor a Taliban kind of government inside Pakistan itself, and it's highly unlikely that they would support any kind of a Taliban-dominated government in Afghanistan because of its effects on Pakistan. So I think the last one is very critical. Within the last year, the Pakistani population has supported the civilian government and the military in mounting a huge campaign against the militancy, against the insurgency, because they do not want this kind of government inside Pakistan, the way they treat women, etc. And so I think that needs to be understood as to how Pakistan will either help or hinder some kind of an orderly military drawdown of the United States.
Okay, well, let's take
economically and politically, I think.
Yeah, go ahead, finish your point. Go ahead, finish your point.
And NATO needs to remain.
Okay, well, you just exactly where I wanted to go. Let's take a look at NATO's perspective on all of this, on how important Afghanistan is, and about withdrawal. Let's listen to what the head of NATO has to say.
We cannot leave Afghanistan prematurely. If we were to leave Afghanistan before we have finished our job, then the Taliban would just return to Afghanistan and create again a safe haven for international terrorism. Terrorists could easily spread from Afghanistan through Central Asia and further. Afghanistan could once again serve as a launch pad for terrorist attacks against North America and Europe.
Okay, Anatol, I'm the eternal pessimist, I'm afraid. I mean, what the head of NATO had to say right there is going to happen, I believe, because it's all, policy on Afghanistan is not being made in Kabul, it's being made in Washington, and it's all about not foreign policy, it's about politics, okay? Obama's choices are very limited right now. Could we see the repeat of history?
Well, yes, I think so. But I have to say, I mean, first on the subject of NATO, I mean, NATO is already leaving.
Yeah.
I mean, you have this Dane saying, we are in Afghanistan. What Danes?
And what's we? Yeah, what's the we now? Okay,
You know,
yes.
What's the we, Kemosabe? You know, what it is in Afghanistan effectively is a coalition of the willing, as usual, mostly Britain and America and Britain by now. I mean, the rest are doing the minimum possible to maintain a relationship with the United States, which keeps the United States in Europe, which they still regard as essential, in a way which some of them will candidly admit in private. This is not really about Afghanistan at all. It's all about European countries believing that they still depend on America in security terms and therefore have to help America. But as you say, in the end, the decisions will be made in Washington. And the question for Obama will be the balance between, on the one hand, the growing unpopularity and seeming hopelessness of the war, but on the other hand, of course, the damage to his administration, which would come from the appearance or the reality of an obvious defeat. And secondly, the fact that while as a senior American general said to me not long ago, while the American armed forces may not know what they're fighting for in Afghanistan, they know what they're fighting against. And what they're fighting against is, once again, the appearance of defeat. They are desperate not to repeat the experience of Vietnam from that point of view. And my sense is that the American armed forces will be willing to fight on for a very long time to avoid that perception, and that they may well be able to drag the administration with them willy-nilly, at least until the point comes where they believe either that the Karzai administration, or more properly the Afghan National Army, can fight, shall we say, to the extent that the regime and the army that the Soviets left behind were able to fight actually in many ways very successfully after 1989.
All right, gentlemen, I'm going to be very provocative right here. The blog sphere is ablaze with speculation. It's seeping into some of the mainstream. If the relationship between Pakistan and the United States does not work out the way Washington wants, there are people talking already that Pakistan could be next on the list because of the safe havens. I mean, Clinton made it, she was almost snide in her commentary about bin Laden being in Pakistan. Dan, if I can go to you, I mean, if it doesn't go all right because everything's going wrong now, the Pakistanis are, you know, again, there's a public face there, but there's a lot of forces in the security forces that are just going to let it just kind of boil along and to see who's going to blink first. And it's probably going to be the Americans. So therefore, should they be keeping an eye out too? Because the United States has shown quite a bit of willingness for aggressive war, but never being able to find a way out. Go ahead.
I think that's what the U.S. is looking for now. I mean, the writing has been on the wall in Afghanistan for the past year or so. Taliban control territory, you know, they've never controlled a larger territory than they do right now. So I don't think there's any way that the U.S. can actually take the war into Pakistan. Pakistan has a proper army. Pakistan is actually a nuclear state, has a proper air force. I don't think there's any way the U.S. could be looking to take the war into Pakistan. What they can do, and in fact what they have been doing with the help of the Indians, is to continue to destabilize Pakistan through Afghanistan, which has been the case for the past year or so. Whether you look at Fatah or you look at Afghanistan, I think the only thing left to do for the U.S. now is this probably will end up like Vietnam. They should really start packing up the bags and looking for an exit. What Pakistan needs to do right now is to work with China, work with the regional powers such as Iran, with Saudi Arabia, in trying to come up with preparing itself for an Afghanistan which is after U.S. basically, and how they're going to pick up the pieces and make it work then.
Well, you're close to my heart because that's been my theme for a very long time now. If I go back to Washington, Shuja, again, there are people saying that, the root of all of this problem, the safe havens, the money gets into Pakistan, the training is there, you can go hit and you'll go back and hide. I mean, that really annoys the United States. I mean, because if you want victory in Afghanistan, as Americans understand it, or the McChrystal-like and Petraeus-like, then give us the tools and we have to go in there and do it. And again, that is where you can't go. I mean, it's hopeless unless you can go in there and go to those safe havens and start wiping it out. Of course, you're going to kill a lot of civilians. civilians and the drones and everything else. I mean, isn't that what the military is going to be saying? Look, this is a hopeless thing unless you can let us do what we really need to do. And that's taboo right now.
Well, Pakistan and just the border region is also a huge country, and if the Americans were unable to successfully fight the Taliban inside Afghanistan, where they have a pretty powerful presence, how are they going to be able to attack the border regions, the Fatah region, inside Pakistan successfully, given all the factors that have been mentioned earlier on this program, that Pakistan has an air force, an army, and also has nuclear weapons, and you certainly cannot remove Pakistan from its geography. It will always be where it is, between Afghanistan and India, and on the commanding heights of the Gulf. So the U.S. needs to look at this very carefully before it goes down this very dangerous path of trying to save itself by provoking some kind of a military conflict with Pakistan.
All right.
I think this is also a fear inside Pakistan.
We're almost running out of time. You want to finish? You want to have a last word, Anatol? Go ahead.
I just wanted to back up, Shuja, and say that actually most of the American soldiers I know do recognize the appalling dangers of a direct attack on Pakistan. I think there are two circumstances in which this would happen. The first if they really had actionable intelligence concerning bin Laden and Zawahiri, then I think they would launch a raid to get them. The second is if, of course, there's a serious terrorist attack on the United States.
All right, I knew someone was going to mention. I'm going to have to jump in here, Anatol. I'm going to have to jump here. Many thanks to my guests today in Dubai, London, and Washington, and thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time, and remember, CrossTalk rules.